The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly under a merciless winter sky, its pristine snow concealing the harsh realities that lay beneath. In this unforgiving landscape, where dreams frosted over quicker than exposed skin, lived a young woman, whose spirit had been systematically broken by the one person meant to protect her. But across those same frozen plains rode another soul entirely, one who would soon discover that sometimes redemption comes not from words, but from the courage to act when witnessing unbearable cruelty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eliza Morgan stared out the frost-etched window of the dilapidated farmhouse, her breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. At 19, she was a captive in all but name, her delicate features hardened not by the bitter Montana winters, but by years of calculated cruelty disguised as maternal love. The Morgan homestead, once a modest but functioning farm, now stood as a testament to neglect, broken fences buried under snowdrifts, empty barns that hadn't sheltered livestock in years, and a main house with gaps in the siding that let in knife-like drafts. Winter had arrived early this year, but Eliza knew their troubles ran deeper than any seasonal hardship. While neighboring farms had adapted to changing markets by diversifying crops and sharing equipment, Catherine Morgan had chosen resentment over resilience, manipulative schemes over honest work. Her husband's death 5 years earlier had given her the perfect excuse to transform from merely controlling to outright tyrannical. "Eliza!" The sharp voice cut through the thin walls like the north wind. "Stop your daydreaming and finish those mending jobs. The Hendersons are sending their wagon tomorrow, and I won't have you costing us money with your laziness." Eliza's fingers, already red and swollen from hours of detailed stitching in the poor light, resumed their mechanical movement. She had inherited her father's gift for fine needlework, a talent her mother had quickly monetized. What had begun as occasional mending for neighbors had evolved into Catherine taking in work from 3 counties around, while Eliza labored from dawn until her eyes could no longer focus. "Coming, mother," she replied, gathering the nearly finished pile of garments. Catherine Morgan sat at the kitchen table, a ledger open before her, lips pursed in perpetual disapproval. At 45, she retained traces of the beauty that had once charmed Thomas Morgan into marriage, but years of bitterness had carved deep lines around her mouth and between her brows. Her once auburn hair now showed streaks of grey, pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her skin taut across sharp cheekbones. "Only 12 pieces completed." Catherine's voice dripped with contempt as she examined Eliza's work. "I promised. The Hendersons 15 by tomorrow. What am I supposed to tell them? That my daughter is too delicate for honest work?" "I've been at it since before sunrise," Eliza said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My fingers are cramping in the cold, and the slap came without warning, Catherine's hand striking Eliza's cheek with practiced precision. "Excuses are for the weak. Your father coddled you with his stories and dreams. And look where that got him. Dead before 40 with nothing to show for his life but debts and a useless daughter." Eliza absorbed the blow silently, having learned long ago that tears only fueled her mother's rage. The mention of her father still cut deep, though Catherine had weaponized his memory countless times. Thomas Morgan had been kind and gentle, filling Eliza's childhood with warmth and imagination, until pneumonia claimed him one brutal winter. Without his buffer, Catherine's true nature had emerged unrestrained. "I'll finish them tonight," Eliza promised, knowing she would work by candlelight, until her fingers bled if necessary. "See that you do." Catherine turned back to her ledger, dismissing her daughter. "And don't waste candles. God knows we can barely afford kerosene as it is." The farm's financial situation had deteriorated steadily since Thomas's death. Catherine blamed everything from unfair markets to spiteful neighbours, never acknowledging that her own bitter personality had alienated potential helpers and customers alike. The mending business brought in just enough to keep them from complete destitution, supplemented by what Eliza could grow in their small garden during the brief summer months. What Catherine never mentioned were the loans. Money borrowed from Douglas Crawford, the wealthiest rancher in the territory. A man whose reputation for collecting debts was matched only by his reputation for collecting young women. Eliza had seen the way Crawford looked at her the few times they'd crossed paths in town, his pale eyes assessing her like a prized mare at auction. The town of Pine Ridge lay 10 miles south, connected to the Morgan farm by a road that disappeared, under snow for months at a time. In better years, they had made weekly trips for supplies and social contact. Now Catherine went alone when absolutely necessary, leaving Eliza isolated except for the occasional customer picking up mending work. Eliza retreated to the small table near the stove, where a meagre fire provided the home's only warmth as she bent over the intricate stitches needed to repair a tear in Mrs. Henderson's Sunday dress. Her mind drifted to escape fantasies that had sustained her through the darkest times. She imagined walking away during the spring thaw, following the road south until she reached the railway station in Billings. With enough money for a ticket, she could disappear to Denver or even Chicago, places where her needlework skills might earn her independence. But such dreams required money, and Catherine controlled every penny that came into the house. The few coins Eliza had managed to hide away over years of careful saving wouldn't get her halfway to Billings, let alone start a new life elsewhere. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Night fell quickly in winter, darkness swallowing the landscape by late afternoon. Eliza worked steadily by the light of a single candle, determined to complete the promised mending despite her aching back and cramping fingers. Catherine had retired to her bedroom with a bottle of laudanum-laced tonic, her usual evening ritual that gave Eliza her only moments of peace. The sudden pounding on the front door startled Eliza so badly she pricked her finger, a drop of blood staining the white fabric of Mrs. Henderson's collar. Visitors after dark were unheard of, especially in the dead of winter. For a moment, she sat frozen, the heavy knocking continuing. "For God's sake, answer it!" Catherine's voice called from her bedroom, slurred but still commanding. Heart pounding, Eliza moved to the door, lifting the iron bar that served as their only lock. Standing on the porch, snow dusting his broad shoulders and wide-brimmed hat, was Douglas Crawford. Behind him, the outline of his sleigh was barely visible in the swirling darkness. "Miss Morgan," he said, removing his hat to reveal silver hair that matched the cold gleam in his eyes. "I apologize for the late visit, but my business couldn't wait for daylight." "Mr. Crawford," Eliza replied, her mouth suddenly dry. "Mother is indisposed at present." "It's your mother I've come to see," Crawford insisted, brushing past her into the house without waiting for an invitation. "The matter concerns you both." Catherine appeared from her bedroom, hastily straightening her hair and clothes, the fog of laudanum still evident in her unfocused gaze. "Douglas, what an unexpected pleasure. Let me put on some coffee to warm you after your journey." Crawford settled his imposing frame at the kitchen table, boots tracking snow across the floor. Eliza had scrubbed that morning. At 60, he moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to power, his tailored coat and leather gloves stark contrasts to the worn furnishings of the Morgan home. "No need for coffee, Catherine. This isn't a social call." His voice carried the clipped accent of Eastern education despite his 30 years in Montana territory. I've come about the note you signed last spring, the one that's now 6 months overdue. Catherine's hospitable smile faltered. Douglas, surely you understand this winter has been particularly difficult. The mending business slows when people can't travel, but come spring, I've heard these promises before, Crawford interrupted. The note was for $1,500, Catherine. With interest, you now owe me nearly $2,000. I've been patient out of respect for Thomas's memory, but my patience has limits. Eliza felt the floor tilt beneath her. $2,000 was an impossible sum, more money than they would see in 5 years of mending work. She knew of families who had lost everything to Crawford when they couldn't meet their obligations. Perhaps we could arrange an extension, Catherine suggested, desperation creeping into her voice. Another 6 months. No more extensions. Crawford's tone left no room for negotiation. However, I am prepared to offer an alternative arrangement that would clear your debt entirely. Something in his expression, as his gaze shifted to Eliza, made her stomach clench with dread. Catherine followed his look, and Eliza saw something terrible pass across her mother's face. Calculation, consideration, and then decision. "What kind of arrangement?" Catherine asked, though Eliza suspected she already knew the answer. "Your daughter," Crawford said simply. "She's of marriageable age, educated enough to be presentable, and from what I hear, skilled with a needle. I find myself in need of a wife to manage my household, and Eliza would suit my purposes admirably." The words hung in the air like the blade of a guillotine. Eliza felt her breath catch, a roaring in her ears drowning out the howling wind outside. Crawford wasn't proposing marriage in any meaningful sense. He was proposing ownership, the transfer of one form of servitude to another. Eliza would have everything she could possibly need, Crawford continued, addressing Catherine as if Eliza weren't standing right there. "Fine clothes, good food, servants to direct. My home is the finest in the territory, as you know. And of course, your debt would be forgiven entirely. I'd even provide you with a small stipend to maintain this place, or to relocate if you prefer." Catherine's eyes narrowed as she considered the proposal, and to Eliza's horror, she saw her mother making financial calculations rather than experiencing maternal outrage. "She's very young," Catherine said. "Not a protection, but a negotiation. In point. 19 is hardly a child," Crawford replied dismissively. "Many girls are mothers twice over by that age. Besides, youth is an advantage in a wife, more malleable, more teachable." The way his tongue lingered over that last word made Eliza's skin crawl. She'd heard whispers about Crawford's previous wives. There had been 2, both significantly younger than him, both now conveniently deceased after unfortunate accidents. "Mother," Eliza said, finding her voice at last, "you can't possibly be considering this." Catherine's expression hardened. "Be quiet, Eliza. This is adult business. Matters beyond your understanding." "But it's my life you're discussing," Eliza protested, a rare defiance rising in her. "I won't agree to this. I won't marry him." Crawford chuckled, the sound entirely devoid of humor. "Your agreement isn't necessary, my dear. In this territory, a parent has legal right to arrange marriages for dependents under 21. Your mother's consent is all that's required." "He's right, Eliza," Catherine said, her voice taking on the reasonable tone that Eliza had learned to fear more than her shouting. "This is the solution to all our problems. Mr. Crawford is offering you a position most girls in this territory would envy. Security, comfort, status as the wife of the most prosperous rancher for 100 miles. "I'd rather starve," Eliza whispered, horrified to find herself trembling. Catherine rose from her chair with surprising steadiness, the prospect of financial salvation apparently burning away the effects of the laudanum. "You're being childish and ungrateful as usual. Mr. Crawford is offering us a way out of destitution, and you respond with dramatics." "I'll expect an answer by tomorrow," Crawford said, rising to his full height and replacing his hat. "I've drawn up the necessary papers already. We could conduct the ceremony within the week, before the next storm makes travel impossible." "You'll have our answer in the morning," Catherine assured him, walking him to the door with the deference of a courtier before a king. When the door closed behind him, Eliza stood frozen in the center of the room, her mind racing with desperate calculations. She could run tonight, taking only what she could carry, but how far would she get in a blizzard with no supplies and nowhere to go? "This discussion is finished," Catherine said when she turned back to face her daughter. "You'll marry Crawford and secure both our futures. It's more than you deserve, considering the burden you've been these past years." "He's a monster," Eliza said softly. "There are stories about what happened to his other wives." "Gossip and spite from jealous neighbors," Catherine dismissed. "Douglas Crawford is a businessman who knows the value of things. He sees your worth, even if you don't." "My worth as property to be traded for debt forgiveness," Eliza said bitterly. "Is that what Father would have wanted for me?" The mention of Thomas triggered Catherine's rage. She crossed the room with surprising speed, grabbing Eliza's face with punishing fingers. "Your father left us with nothing but pretty words and impossible dreams. His weakness brought us to this point, and now you'll do what's necessary to fix it." "And if I refuse?" Eliza asked, meeting her mother's gaze directly for perhaps the first time in years. Catherine's grip tightened. "Then I'll sign the papers, declaring you mentally unfit. Crawford has connections with the territorial judge. They'll commit you to that asylum in Helena, and Crawford will be appointed your guardian anyway. Is that what you want? To be locked away with the truly insane, while Crawford manages whatever's left of your life?" The threat was not idle. Eliza had heard of young women disappeared into such institutions for offenses as minor as reading unsuitable books or speaking too boldly in public. Once committed, they rarely emerged. "You wouldn't," she whispered, though she knew with sickening certainty that her mother absolutely would. "Try me," Catherine hissed, releasing her with a small shove. "Now finish that mending. I want everything ready for the Hendersons tomorrow. We still need that money until the wedding is finalized." Left alone, Eliza returned to her sewing with numb fingers, her mind frantically searching for options where none existed. By the time the mending was complete, the candle burned low and the fire had died to embers, leaving the room in semi-darkness. That matched her despair. She had one night of freedom left. Tomorrow Catherine would give Crawford his answer, and Eliza's fate would be sealed. She thought of her small cache of savings, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her room, barely $12 accumulated over years of careful hoarding. Not enough to escape, but perhaps enough for... what? What could possibly save her? Now, sleep eluded her that night. Eliza lay awake listening to the wind howl around the eaves of the old farmhouse, a sound that had frightened her as a child, but now seemed an appropriate accompaniment to her inner turmoil. Her father had once told her that the wind carried messages for those wise enough to listen. Tonight it seemed to be screaming a warning she already understood too well. Morning brought no reprieve, only the certainty of Crawford's return and the knowledge that Catherine had already made her decision. Eliza moved through her chores mechanically, feeding the chickens that provided their eggs, bringing in wood for the stove, preparing the meager breakfast that would sustain them through the morning. Catherine watched her with narrow eyes, as if expecting her to bolt at any moment. "You'll thank me for this one day," she said as they ate. "When you're mistress of the finest house in the territory, you'll understand I did what was best." "Best for whom?" Eliza asked quietly. "For both of us," Catherine snapped. "This farm is dying, Eliza. Another year, maybe 2, and we'll lose it anyway. At least this way we salvage something. You get security and I get freedom from debt." And Crawford gets a young wife he can control, Eliza added. Everyone wins except my soul. Catherine's laugh was brittle. Soul! Your father filled your head with such nonsense. There's no room for poetry in survival, girl. Crawford will be here by noon. Make yourself presentable. First impressions as his future wife matter more than they did as a debtor's daughter. The morning crawled by with excruciating slowness. Eliza bathed in water, barely warmed over the stove, washed her hair with the precious bit of soap Catherine had been saving for special occasions, and put on her one good dress, a dark blue, wool that had been her mother's, altered to fit her smaller frame. The irony of preparing for her own sacrifice wasn't lost on her. Around 11, the distant sound of sleigh bells drifted through the still air. Catherine hurried to the window, her expression shifting from anticipation to confusion. "That's not Crawford's sleigh," she said, peering through the frosted glass. "It's a stranger." Hope flared briefly in Eliza's chest before common sense extinguished it. A stranger meant nothing, just a traveller lost in the vast whiteness. Or perhaps a messenger from Crawford himself. The sleigh that pulled up to their gate was smaller than Crawford's grand conveyance, drawn by a single horse instead of a matched pair. The driver, bundled against the cold, sat alone on the bench. He secured the reins and stepped down with the easy grace of someone accustomed to much time in the saddle, approaching the house with purposeful strides. Catherine straightened her dress and pinched her cheeks for color, ever conscious of appearances. "Eliza, see who it is. If they're selling something, we're not interested." Eliza opened the door as the stranger reached the porch. He removed his hat, revealing a face younger than she expected, perhaps 30 or 35, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and eyes the color of the summer sky. Something in those eyes caught and held her attention, a quiet strength, an assessment without the predatory quality she'd come to expect from men in these parts. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. Not Eastern like Crawford's, but not local either. "I'm looking for the Morgan farm. Catherine Morgan, specifically." "I'm Catherine Morgan," her mother said, pushing past Eliza to stand in the doorway. "What business brings you here, Mr. D?" "Gabriel Reyes," he supplied with a slight nod. "I've recently purchased the old Wilson property to the north. I understand you have some skill with needlework. I'm in need of someone to repair some household linens and perhaps make curtains for the main house." Catherine's demeanor instantly shifted to accommodating businesswoman. "Of course, Mr. Reyes. Please come in out of the cold. Eliza, put on some coffee for our guest." Reyes stepped into their home, removing his gloves to reveal strong, work-hardened hands. Unlike Crawford, who examined their possessions with barely concealed disdain, Reyes seemed to take in the modest surroundings with simple acceptance, neither judging nor pitying. "The Wilson place has been abandoned for years," Catherine remarked, as she directed him to sit at the kitchen table. "What brings you to this part of Montana, Mr. Reyes? It's hardly the center of opportunity." "I find opportunity exists where you choose to create it," he replied, accepting the coffee Eliza placed before him with a nod of thanks. "The land is good, the price was fair, and I prefer the honesty of rural life to the complications of cities." "You're a long way from neighbors," Catherine observed. "The nearest farm is 5 miles south, and we're 10 miles from town." Reyes smiled slightly. "I value my privacy, Mrs. Morgan, and distance has never troubled me much." As the conversation continued, Eliza studied their visitor with cautious interest. Unlike most men who came to the house on business, Reyes acknowledged her presence, including her in the discussion when appropriate, his gaze direct but respectful when it fell on her. There was something deliberate about him, she realized, a man who chose his words and actions with care. "I can certainly handle your household linens," Catherine was saying, shifting into the negotiation phase. "My rates are fair but firm. Quality workmanship doesn't come cheap, even in these parts." I wouldn't expect it to, Reyes agreed easily. I believe in paying properly for skilled work. The sound of another sleigh approaching cut through their conversation. Catherine's expression tightened, and Eliza felt her stomach drop. Crawford had arrived right on schedule. "Excuse me," Catherine said to Reyes. "I have another appointment. Perhaps we could continue this discussion later." "Of course," Reyes replied, though he made no move to leave. Instead, his gaze moved to the window where Crawford's imposing figure was visible approaching the house. The door opened without. A knock, and Douglas Crawford stepped inside, bringing with him a blast of cold air and the heavy presence of entitlement. He stopped short at the sight of Gabriel Reyes sitting calmly at the kitchen table. "I wasn't aware you had company, Catherine," Crawford said, his voice carrying a note of displeasure. "Mr. Reyes was just leaving," Catherine replied quickly. "He's new to the area, looking for someone to do household mending." Crawford's eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed the stranger. "Douglas Crawford," he introduced himself with the expectation of recognition. "I own the Double C Ranch south of Pine Ridge." "Ibri Gabriel Reyes," came the calm reply, accompanied by a nod that acknowledged Crawford without conveying the deference the older man clearly expected. "Recently purchased the Wilson property." "That worthless stretch of land." Crawford's laugh was dismissive. "Good luck making anything of it. Wilsons couldn't even grow decent hay there." "Different men, different methods," Reyes said mildly, rising from his seat. "Mrs. Morgan, I'll return in a few days to discuss those household items. Perhaps you'll have had time to consider a fair price by then." "Actually, Mr. Reyes," Crawford interjected, "the Morgans may be relocating soon. Any business arrangements should be considered temporary." Something shifted in Reyes's expression, a subtle hardening around the eyes, a slight tension in his jawline. "Is that so?" he asked, looking not at Crawford but at Eliza. Before she could respond, Catherine cut in sharply. "Our plans aren't finalized, Mr. Reyes. I'm sure we can accommodate your mending needs regardless." Crawford produced a leather folio from inside his coat. "I've brought the papers we discussed, Catherine. Once they're signed, we can proceed with arrangements immediately." Eliza watched a silent communication pass between Reyes and Crawford. An assessment, a recognition of something fundamental about each other that transcended their brief introduction. It was the wariness of two predators sharing the same territory, though Reyes concealed his nature far better than Crawford, whose power was always on display. "I should take my leave," Reyes said, reaching for his hat and gloves. "Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Morgan. Miss Morgan." As he moved toward the door, he paused beside Eliza, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Sometimes the right path isn't clear until you're standing at the crossroads." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow carried more finality than Crawford's dramatic entrance. Eliza stared after him, puzzling over his cryptic words and wondering why a stranger's departure should leave her feeling even more abandoned. "Now then," Crawford said, spreading papers across the kitchen table, "let's conclude our business, shall we? I have a minister waiting in town who can perform the ceremony tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Eliza exclaimed, the timeline even more accelerated than she'd feared. "No point in delay," Crawford replied, without looking up from his documents. "The weather's holding for now, but another storm is due by week's end. Better to have everything settled before then." Catherine was already reviewing the papers, her expression calculating as she noted the terms of the arrangement. "This stipend is less than we discussed," she remarked. "Considering the depreciated condition of this property, I believe it's more than fair," Crawford countered smoothly. "The debt forgiveness alone represents considerable generosity on my part." As they haggled over the financial details of her future, Eliza felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching a scene in a play rather than the negotiation of her own life. The farm that had been her prison was about to be exchanged for a gilded cage, and her mother was quibbling over the price like a merchant with a piece of livestock. "Eliza will need time to pack her belongings," Catherine was saying. "She can bring personal items only," Crawford stipulated. "My home is fully furnished with everything of quality. I won't have it cluttered with sentimental objects." The dismissive glance he cast around their humble home made his meaning clear. Nothing from this life was worthy of his magnificent house. Eliza thought of her father's books, the handmade quilt her grandmother had stitched, the small treasures that connected her to a family history Crawford would erase at a stroke. "I'll need her to sign here," Crawford said, indicating a line, "at the bottom of one document. While not legally necessary, it prevents complications later if anyone questions the arrangement." Catherine beckoned Eliza forward. "Come sign the paper, Eliza. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Eliza approached the table on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The document before her was filled with legal terminology. She barely understood, but the essence was clear enough. She was being transferred like property, her consent a mere formality to prevent future complications. Crawford held out a pen, his pale eyes watching her with the patient anticipation of a man who always got what he wanted, one way or another. "Your signature, Miss Morgan. Then we can all move forward with our new arrangements." Eliza's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. She thought of running, of refusing, of screaming until her throat was raw, but where would it lead except to the asylum Catherine had threatened? There were no good choices, only the illusion of choice where none existed. Just as her fingers closed around the pen, a sharp knock at the door startled all three of them. Catherine's irritation was visible as she moved to answer it, clearly resenting any further delay in concluding the transaction that would solve her financial problems. When she opened the door, Gabriel Reyes stood on the threshold once more, snowflakes dusting his dark hair and the shoulders of his coat. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, though his tone suggested he felt no need for forgiveness. "I realized we hadn't discussed timeline and payment terms for the household work. Since I was still nearby, I thought it more efficient to settle those details now." "This really isn't a convenient time," Catherine began, but Reyes had already stepped past her into the house, his gaze taking in the papers spread across the table and the pen in Eliza's hand. "Am I interrupting legal business?" he asked. Mildly. "Private family matters," Crawford said curtly. "Nothing that concerns you, Reyes." "No, perhaps not," Reyes agreed, his eyes meeting Eliza's with an intensity that seemed to convey something beyond his casual words. "Though I've found that, in small communities, neighbors' welfare often becomes interconnected in unexpected ways." "We're hardly neighbors," Crawford scoffed. "My ranch is 20 miles south of here." "Geography is relative in Montana," Reyes replied with a slight smile. "May I ask, what brings the territory's most prominent rancher to negotiate personally with a widow and her daughter? Surely you have managers who handle minor business matters." The question was posed innocently enough, but Eliza detected an underlying current of challenge. Crawford evidently sensed it too, his posture stiffening defensively. "My business with the Morgans is personal rather than commercial," he said, gathering the papers with deliberate movements. "In fact, you're witnessing the preliminary arrangements for my marriage to Miss Morgan here." Eliza flinched at hearing it stated so boldly, the reality of her situation impossible to ignore when spoken aloud. She expected to see pity or disinterest in Reyes's expression, the typical reactions of those who witnessed Crawford's power plays, but instead found something that looked remarkably like controlled anger. "Is that so?" Reyes said, his voice deceptively casual. Congratulations would seem appropriate then, though I must say Miss Morgan appears less than enthusiastic about the prospect. Young women often fail to recognize advantageous arrangements until experience teaches them better, Crawford said dismissively. Eliza will come to appreciate the opportunity I'm providing. Opportunity, Reyes repeated, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. An interesting choice of term for what appears to be a business transaction rather than a marriage proposal. Crawford's face darkened with anger. You overstep, sir. My relationship with Miss Morgan is none of your concern. You misunderstand, Reyes said, his calm unruffled by Crawford's growing hostility. I'm merely making an observation about terminology. In my experience, opportunities are freely chosen, not imposed through legal documents and parental pressure. Catherine stepped forward, clearly alarmed by the direction the conversation was taking. Mr. Reyes, while we appreciate your interest in our mending services, this is, as Mr. Crawford stated, a private family matter. Perhaps you could return tomorrow to discuss your household needs. Of course, Reyes agreed, though he made no move toward the door. Instead, he addressed Eliza directly. Miss Morgan, may I ask if this marriage represents your chosen path, or are there circumstances compelling your participation? The directness of the question stunned everyone in the room. For a moment, no one spoke, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the mantel and the soft hiss of snow against the windows. How dare you question the lady's intentions? Crawford blustered, recovering first. Catherine, I suggest you show this presumptuous interloper the door before I forget my manners entirely. But Eliza, finding courage in Reyes's steady gaze, spoke before her mother could act. I have no choice, she said simply. My mother owes Mr. Crawford a debt that would ruin us. My hand in marriage is the payment he demands. The silence that followed Eliza's declaration was absolute, the simple truth of her situation hanging in the air like frost crystals. Gabriel Reyes's expression shifted from polite inquiry to something harder, a steel-like resolve settling over his features. Debt payment through forced marriage, he said quietly. An interesting contract in a territory that prides itself on justice and freedom. Crawford's face flushed dark with anger. This is a private arrangement between consenting parties. The girl's consent is implied through her mother's legal authority. Is that how you justify it? Reyes asked, his voice deceptively mild. Legal technicalities to mask what amounts to indentured servitude? Catherine stepped between the men, her thin face pinched with anxiety. Mr. Reyes, I appreciate your concern, but you don't understand our situation. The debt is substantial, and Mr. Crawford is generously offering a solution that benefits everyone involved. Everyone except your daughter, Reyes observed. Interesting that you consider her happiness so dispensable. Happiness is a luxury we cannot afford, Catherine snapped, her facade of politeness cracking. Security and survival come first. Reyes nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Crawford. What's the debt amount? Crawford's eyebrows rose in surprise at the direct question. That's hardly your concern. I'm making it my concern, Reyes replied calmly. Name the figure. Something in his tone made Crawford reassess the man standing before him. After a moment's calculation, he said, $2,000, plus interest accrued during Mrs. Morgan's repeated failures to meet payment terms. Reyes didn't flinch at the substantial sum. Instead, he reached inside his coat and removed a leather wallet. I'm prepared to clear that debt in full, with an additional $500 for any inconvenience. The room went still with shock. Eliza stared at Reyes, unable to process what was happening. Crawford recovered first, a harsh laugh escaping him. You think you can simply buy your way into this situation? Who are you, Reyes? What's your interest in the Morgan girl? My interest is in preventing injustice when I encounter it, Reyes replied evenly. As for who I am, someone with enough funds to offer Mrs. Morgan a better solution than selling her daughter. He turned to Catherine, whose expression had transformed from dismissive to calculating at the mention of money. Mrs. Morgan, I'm offering to clear your debt to Crawford completely. In exchange, your daughter comes to work at my ranch as housekeeper and seamstress for 1 year. Fair wages, separate living quarters, and most importantly, her freedom when the year is complete. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Why would you make such an offer to strangers? Let's call it a business investment, Reyes said. I need domestic help establishing my household, and your daughter's skills seem well suited to my needs. The arrangement is temporary and contractual, with clear boundaries and compensation. Crawford slammed his hand down on the table, papers scattering. This is absurd. We had an agreement, Catherine. The papers are drawn up and ready for signature. Oh, we haven't signed anything yet, Catherine pointed out, her mercenary nature already calculating the advantages of Reyes's unexpected offer. And Mr. Reyes is offering immediate payment plus additional compensation. Eliza watched in disbelief as her mother pivoted smoothly from one transaction to another, still treating her daughter as a commodity, but now considering which buyer offered the better terms. Yet Reyes's proposal, while still treating her as an asset to be traded, at least offered something Crawford never would, an end date. Freedom after a year of service versus a lifetime under Crawford's control. This is outrageous, Crawford sputtered. You can't seriously be considering this interloper's proposal. I'm considering what's best for our financial situation, Catherine replied coolly. A year of Eliza's service to clear the debt entirely versus an ongoing entanglement with uncertain stipend terms. Reyes reached into his coat again, this time producing a small leather bag that clinked heavily as he set it on the table. $2,500, cash, available immediately with no complex legal documents or ongoing obligations. Crawford stared at the bag, then at Reyes, reassessment clear in his pale eyes. You carry that kind of money with you casually, Reyes? Interesting for a man who just purchased a rundown property like the Wilson place. I believe in being prepared for opportunities, Reyes replied smoothly. The Wilson property suited my immediate needs. My resources extend beyond what might be apparent from that purchase. Eliza found her voice at last. Don't I have any say in this arrangement? You're both discussing my future as if I were furniture being auctioned. Reyes turned to her, his expression softening slightly. You absolutely have a say, Miss Morgan. My offer includes a provision that you must agree to the terms voluntarily. Unlike Mr. Crawford's arrangement, this isn't a transfer of ownership. It's a limited-term employment contract with clear boundaries. What guarantee do I have that you'll honor those boundaries? Eliza asked, meeting his gaze directly. That this isn't simply a different kind of trap? A fair question, Reyes acknowledged. I propose a written contract, witnessed by the town sheriff and pastor, specifying exact terms of employment, living conditions, wages, and termination date. Any violation of those terms would render the contract void, the debt cleared regardless, and entitle you to the full year's wages as compensation. The thoroughness of his response surprised her. This wasn't an impulsive offer, but something he had considered carefully, with protections built in that suggested genuine concern for her welfare. Crawford, watching the exchange with growing fury, turned to Catherine. This is your final opportunity. Mrs. Morgan, either your daughter signs these marriage documents now, or I'll call in my loan immediately and see you both evicted before the next snowfall. Catherine hesitated, torn between fear of Crawford's retribution and the tangible money Reyes offered. The debt would be completely forgiven, she asked Reyes. No future claims against our property. Completely forgiven, Reyes confirmed. I'll provide written documentation releasing all claims against your property or future earnings. Catherine looked at the leather bag on the table, then at Crawford's reddening face, making the calculation that had always governed her decisions. Which option provided the greatest benefit with the least ongoing obligation? We accept Mr. Reyes's proposal, she announced. Eliza will work for him for 1 year to clear the debt. You'll regret this, Catherine, Crawford said, his voice low with menace as he gathered his papers. No one in this territory crosses me without consequences. I've made a business decision, Catherine replied, her chin lifting with defiance now that Reyes's money sat within reach. As you've often said yourself, sentiment has no place in financial matters. Crawford turned his cold gaze on Reyes. And you've made an enemy today, one you can't afford in these parts. I don't know what game you're playing, but mark my words, it won't end well for you. Reyes met the threat with calm composure. I'm not playing any game, Mr. Crawford, just offering a fair alternative to an unjust arrangement. As for enemies, I've had more dangerous ones than a man who preys on desperate women and girls. The implied insult hung in the air between and them. For a moment, Eliza thought Crawford might physically attack Reyes, his hand twitching toward the inside of his coat where he likely carried a weapon. But Reyes stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed, yet somehow alert, his eyes never leaving Crawford's face. Something in that steady gaze must have warned Crawford against violence, for he finally turned away with a curse, stomping toward the door. This isn't over, he said over his shoulder. Not by a long measure. When the door slammed behind him, the small house seemed suddenly larger, as if Crawford's presence had consumed physical space as well as oxygen. Through the window, Eliza watched him climb into his sleigh, whipping his horses with unnecessary force as he drove away. Well, Catherine said, breaking the tense silence, that was certainly dramatic. Now, Mr. Reyes, shall we discuss the specifics of this arrangement? We should, Reyes agreed, his demeanor businesslike now that Crawford had departed. Miss Morgan will need time to gather her belongings. I propose we travel to town first, to draw up and witness the proper contracts, then return here for her personal items. Catherine's hand moved toward the leather bag still sitting on the table, but Reyes smoothly reclaimed it. The money transfers when the contracts are signed, he said pleasantly but firmly. Standard business practice, I'm sure you understand. Eliza watched her mother's momentary frustration quickly masked by pragmatism. Of course, Catherine agreed. Shall we depart immediately? The daylight hours are short this time of year. I'd like a moment to speak with Miss Morgan privately, Reyes said. Since she'll be working in my household, we should establish clear expectations from the beginning. Catherine frowned at this breach of her authority, but nodded grudgingly. I'll prepare for the trip to town, she said, retreating to her bedroom with obvious reluctance. When they were alone, Reyes turned to Eliza with an expression that had transformed from businesslike to genuinely concerned. Are you all right? He asked quietly. The simple question, asked with what seemed like real interest in her answer, nearly undid her composure. When had anyone last asked about her welfare rather than her usefulness? I hardly know, she admitted. Everything has happened so quickly. This morning I was facing marriage to Crawford, and now I'm agreeing to work. For a stranger for a year, I'm not sure which fate is more uncertain. The difference, Reyes said gently, is that one arrangement would have been permanent and the other is temporary. After a year with me, you'll have your freedom and enough saved wages to go wherever you choose. If you honor the contract, Eliza pointed out, I have only your word that you're different from Crawford. Reyes nodded, accepting the challenge in her statement. Your skepticism is warranted. I'm asking you to trust a stranger when experience has taught you that trust is dangerous. All I can offer is my word. and the legal protections I suggested. The contract will specify that you work reasonable hours, have private quarters, receive fair wages, and are never required to provide services beyond normal household duties. The delicacy with which he approached the subject told Eliza he understood her deepest fears about this arrangement. Yet something in his manner, the careful distance he maintained while speaking to her as an equal, suggested his intentions might genuinely be as straightforward as he claimed. "Why are you doing this?" she asked directly. $2,500 is a substantial sum to pay for a housekeeper, no matter how skilled. A shadow passed across Reyes's features, something old and painful briefly visible before being carefully tucked away. "Let's say I've witnessed similar situations before and regretted not intervening. Some debts can't be measured in dollars, Miss Morgan." Before she could press further, Catherine returned, dressed for travel and visibly impatient. "We should leave immediately if we're to reach town before the banker closes," she announced. The journey to Pine Ridge was conducted mostly in silence, Eliza wrapped in her mother's old fur coat in the back of Reyes's sleigh, while he and Catherine sat in front, each lost in their own thoughts. The snow-covered landscape passed in a blur of white and grey, the cloudy sky promising more snow before nightfall. Pine Ridge consisted of one main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, hotel, saloon, church, and the necessary businesses that served the surrounding ranches and farms. At the far end stood the sheriff's office and beside it the small bank where Crawford conducted much of his business. Reyes guided his sleigh directly to the sheriff's office, a strategic choice that Eliza appreciated. Sheriff Thomas Henderson was known as one of the few men in the territory who couldn't be bought by Crawford's influence, maintaining a stubborn independence that had earned him respect and enemies in equal measure. "Mr. Reyes," Henderson greeted them as they entered, the warmth of his office. "Mrs. Morgan, Miss Morgan, an unexpected pleasure to see you all the way in town during winter." "We're here on business, Sheriff," Reyes explained. "I'd like your assistance in witnessing a contract between myself and the Morgans." Henderson's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "What kind of contract?" "Employment terms," Reyes said smoothly. "Miss Morgan will be working at my ranch for a year, and I want to ensure the arrangement is properly documented and witnessed." The sheriff's gaze moved to Eliza, assessing her expression with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to reading people in difficult situations. "Miss Morgan, is this arrangement of your own free will?" "It is," Eliza said, finding strength in the simple truth. "Mr. Reyes is helping us resolve a difficult financial situation through a temporary work agreement." Henderson nodded slowly. "Crawford's debt, I'm guessing. Man's been squeezing half the county with those high-interest loans of his." Catherine stiffened at the blunt assessment, but didn't contradict him. Her silence was confirmation enough. "We'll need to involve Barton over at the bank to process the debt forgiveness," Henderson said, reaching for his coat. "And probably Pastor Williams to serve as a second witness. Give me 10 minutes to gather them at the bank." While they waited for Henderson to return, Reyes produced a document from inside his coat. "I've drafted preliminary terms," he explained, handing the paper to Eliza. "Please review them carefully and suggest any changes you feel necessary." Eliza scanned the document with surprise. The terms were more favorable than she had dared hope. Reasonable working hours, Sundays free, private living quarters in a separate cabin on the property, fair monthly wages paid directly to her rather than to Catherine, and most importantly, a firm end date 1 year from signing. "This is generous," she said cautiously. "It's fair," Reyes corrected. "You're providing valuable skills and service. That deserves proper compensation and respect." Catherine snatched the paper from Eliza's hands, her eyes narrowing as she read. "These wages are excessive," she declared, "and why should the money go directly to Eliza rather than to me? She's still under my guardianship." "She's 19 and providing the labor," Reyes replied firmly. "The wages are hers. The debt forgiveness is your compensation." Catherine's mouth tightened with displeasure, but before she could argue further, Henderson returned with the banker and pastor in tow. The next hour was spent in the bank's private office, finalizing and witnessing the 3 documents that would transform Eliza's future: the employment contract specifying her duties and rights at Reyes's ranch, the debt forgiveness document releasing all Crawford's claims against the Morgan property, and a receipt for the full payment of $2,500 from Reyes to Catherine. As she signed her name to the employment contract, Eliza felt a curious mixture of apprehension and hope. She was still being traded to resolve her mother's debts, but the terms of this transaction at least acknowledged her humanity and provided a path to eventual independence. "You understand the terms completely, Miss Morgan?" Pastor Williams asked kindly. "You're under no obligation or pressure to sign if you have any reservations." "I understand," Eliza confirmed, "and I sign willingly." Catherine accepted the bank draft with poorly concealed eagerness, immediately making arrangements to convert it to cash. Eliza noted that her mother showed no hesitation about remaining in town overnight rather than returning to the farm to help her daughter pack, a final confirmation, if any were needed, of where Catherine's priorities truly lay. "I'll collect you and your belongings tomorrow morning at 9, Reyes told Eliza as they prepared to part ways. "Pack whatever personal items hold meaning for you. Don't concern yourself with household goods or work clothes. Those will be provided." Eliza nodded, still somewhat dazed by the day's rapid developments. "Mr. Reyes," she said as he turned to leave, "thank you for offering an alternative. Whatever your reasons, you've given me something Crawford never would have, a future beyond servitude." Something flickered in his eyes, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked by his now familiar composure. "We all deserve the chance to shape our own destinies, Miss Morgan. Sometimes that requires a helping hand at a critical juncture." With that cryptic statement, he departed, leaving Eliza to make her way back to the farm, alone, in the small cart Henderson had arranged for her. As she guided the placid mare through the snowy landscape, her mind raced with questions about Gabriel. Reyes? Who was he really? What had brought him to this remote corner of Montana with enough cash to casually resolve debts that would crush most settlers? And most puzzling of all, why had he intervened in her fate when he stood to gain nothing but an overpriced housekeeper and Crawford's enmity? The farmhouse seemed eerily quiet when Eliza returned. Without Catherine's domineering presence or the immediate threat of Crawford, the small building felt like a different place. Still the site of years of hardship, but somehow less oppressive. Now that she knew her time, there was limited. She moved through the rooms slowly, selecting the few treasures she couldn't bear to leave behind. Her father's books, carefully wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the weather. The quilt her grandmother had made, worn but still beautiful with its intricate stitching. A small wooden box containing her mother's wedding ring, the only reminder of a time when Catherine might have been capable of love rather than merely calculation. As darkness fell, Eliza found herself sitting at the kitchen table, a single candle illuminating the employment contract she had signed. The formal language transformed her life into a series of duties, obligations, and compensations, yet somehow preserved her essential dignity in a way Crawford's marriage proposal never would have. Whatever awaited her at the Reyes ranch, she would face it with the knowledge that it was temporary, a stepping stone to the independence she had dreamed of but never believed possible. For the first time in years, Eliza allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival, beyond the crushing weight of her mother's bitterness and Crawford's predatory attention. She slept that night with the contract beside her pillow, a tangible reminder that tomorrow would bring not an ending, but a beginning. Uncertain and frightening, perhaps, but contained within boundaries she had willingly accepted rather than those forced upon her. Morning brought heavy snow and biting wind, the kind of day when sensible people stayed indoors close to the fire. Eliza had been awake since before dawn, finishing her packing and cleaning the small bedroom that had been her only sanctuary for so many years. She wanted to leave nothing of herself behind, no trace that might draw her back to this place of painful memories. At precisely 9 o'clock, Gabriel Reyes's sleigh appeared through the curtain of falling snow, his punctuality somehow reassuring. He helped load her few possessions without comment on their modest nature, securing everything carefully against the weather. "Are you ready?" he asked simply, when the last bundle was tied down. Eliza took a final look at the farmhouse, the only home she had ever known. Despite the hardships it represented, there was a moment of hesitation, the natural fear of leaving the familiar for the unknown. "Yes," she said finally, turning away from the past. "I'm ready." As the sleigh pulled away, Eliza didn't look back. Whatever awaited her at the Reyes ranch, it represented possibility rather than certainty, and possibility, she was beginning to understand, was the first ingredient of freedom. The journey to the Reyes ranch unfolded in companionable silence. The rhythmic crunch of snow beneath the sleigh runners, punctuated only by the occasional direction Gabriel offered to his horse. Eliza huddled beneath thick buffalo robes he had provided, grateful for their warmth against the biting January wind. The snow had intensified, transforming the landscape into an ethereal dreamscape where familiar landmarks disappeared and the world narrowed to the immediate path before them. "We'll be following the northern ridge," Gabriel explained as they left the main road. "It adds about 3 miles to the journey, but the trail is more protected from drifts. I'd rather not risk getting stranded in this weather." Eliza nodded, appreciating his practical caution. "Have you lived in Montana long? You seem familiar with winter travel." "On and off for several years," he replied, his attention focused on guiding the horse through a particularly deep patch of snow. "I've wintered in worse conditions than this." There was something in his tone that discouraged further questions about his past, so Eliza turned her attention to the landscape instead. They were traveling through a narrow valley she had never visited, despite its relative proximity to her mother's farm. The Wilson property lay in a section of the territory most locals considered marginal at best, too rocky for proper farming, too remote for convenient ranching. "What made you choose this area?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her natural reticence. "The Wilson place has been abandoned for years. Most people considered it worthless." Gabriel's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "I prefer to make my own assessments of worth rather than relying on popular opinion. The land has good water, natural shelter for livestock, and more potential than people realize when they're looking through the lens of conventional thinking." His answer intrigued her, suggesting layers of consideration beyond the obvious. This man didn't think like most settlers who came to Montana seeking quick profits from mining or cattle. He thought in longer terms, seeing value others missed. The trail curved around a stand of pine trees, and suddenly the Wilson property, now the Reyes ranch, came into view. Eliza's eyes widened in surprise. She had expected a dilapidated homestead, similar to many abandoned properties scattered throughout the territory. Instead, she saw a property transformed through obvious care and substantial investment. The original Wilson cabin had been expanded and reinforced, its log walls freshly chinked against the weather, a new stone chimney rising solidly against the grey sky. Beside it stood a large barn that hadn't existed when the Wilsons left, its red paint a bright contrast against the snow. Several smaller outbuildings formed a protective semicircle around a central yard, creating a windbreak that allowed activity even in harsh weather. "This doesn't look like a place purchased a few weeks ago," Eliza observed, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Gabriel guided the sleigh toward the main house. "I bought the property 3 months ago and have been working on improvements since then." The Wilsons' claim was much larger than most people realized, nearly 600 acres stretching back into that valley. Alone, this much work would take a crew of men. "I had help," he acknowledged, "good men who appreciate fair pay and clear direction." As they approached the house, the front door opened to reveal a short, stocky man with iron-gray hair and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades outdoors. He hurried forward to help with the horse. "Right on time despite the weather, boss," the man said approvingly. "Was beginning to worry when the snow picked up." "Miguel, this is Miss Eliza Morgan," Gabriel introduced. "She'll be managing the household and providing her skills as a seamstress. Miss Morgan, this is Miguel Vasquez, my foreman and the man responsible for much of what you see here." Miguel tipped his hat respectfully. "Welcome to Nuevo Amanecer." "Miss Morgan." "Thank you," Eliza replied, then added with curiosity, "Nuevo Amanecer." "New dawn," Gabriel translated as he helped her down from the sleigh. It seemed fitting for a place being given a second chance. The symbolism wasn't lost on Eliza, who found herself warming to the idea of living in a place defined by new beginnings rather than past failures. As they approached the house, she noticed other signs of thoughtful renovation: glass windows rather than oiled paper, a covered porch that would provide shade in summer, even decorative carvings on the porch posts that transformed utilitarian supports into elements of beauty. "Rosa has prepared your cabin," Miguel was saying as they reached the porch, "and the house is warm for your arrival." "Rosa?" Eliza questioned. "My wife," Miguel explained with evident pride. "She manages the cooking and helped prepare your accommodations. She's eager to meet you. Hasn't had another woman to talk to for months, except when we make the trip to town." The interior of the main house confirmed Eliza's impression of careful planning and substantial investment. The original one-room cabin had been expanded into a comfortable living space with a large central room featuring a massive stone fireplace, a proper kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, and what appeared to be several private rooms branching off a short hallway. A delicious aroma of baking bread and simmering stew permeated the air, making Eliza suddenly aware of how little she had eaten since the previous day's tumultuous events. A small, round-faced woman emerged from the kitchen area, wiping her hands on a clean apron. "You must be frozen through," she said, her English accented but clear. "Come sit by the fire. I have hot coffee and fresh bread ready." "Rosa, this is Miss Morgan," Gabriel said, as the woman efficiently ushered them toward the hearth. Rosa's warm brown eyes assessed Eliza with motherly concern. "Too thin," she declared. "Montana winters require more padding on the bones. We will fix this, yes?" The simple kindness after years of Catherine's critical scrutiny brought an unexpected lump to Eliza's throat. She managed a nod, suddenly overwhelmed by the contrast between the home she had left and this place where strangers welcomed her with warmth and apparent sincerity. "Let's get you settled first," Gabriel suggested, noting her fatigue. "Then food and a chance to rest. The work can wait until tomorrow." He led her back outside and across the central yard to a small cabin set slightly apart from the main house. Like everything else on the property, it showed signs of recent renovation. A new roof, sturdy door with proper hinges, even curtains visible through spotless windows. "This will be your private quarters," Gabriel explained, opening the door to reveal a space that took Eliza's breath away with its simple thoughtfulness. The single-room cabin had been transformed into a cozy haven, A cast-iron stove in one corner already radiated welcome heat. A comfortable bed, with what appeared to be a handmade quilt, occupied another corner, partially screened by a decorative fabric panel for privacy. A small table with 2 chairs sat beneath the window, and a rocking chair with plump cushions waited invitingly beside the stove. Most surprising of all was a small bookshelf containing several volumes, an unimaginable luxury in most frontier households. "The bathroom facilities are simple but private," Gabriel continued, indicating a screened area containing a large wash basin and pitcher. "Rosa will help you arrange a bathing schedule that offers proper privacy. We've planned a proper bathhouse, with hot water piped in from the kitchen stove, but that won't be completed until spring." Eliza moved slowly into the space, touching the quilt, the curtains, the books, trying to process the reality of such accommodations. Even Catherine, with her pretensions to gentility, had never achieved this level of comfort in their farmhouse. "This is not what I expected," she admitted finally. "What did you expect?" Gabriel asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. "A corner in the main house, perhaps, or quarters in a bunkhouse shared with others. Not this." She gestured to encompass the private cabin with its thoughtful amenities. "The contract specified private living quarters," he reminded her. "I keep my agreements to the letter, Miss Morgan. But this goes beyond the basic requirements. This shows." She struggled to articulate what moved her so deeply about the space. "Respect," he suggested quietly. "That's the foundation of any proper working relationship. You'll be contributing valuable skills to this household. You deserve appropriate accommodation and privacy in return." Before she could respond, Miguel appeared at the door with her trunks. "Where would you like these, Miss Morgan?" The simple question, asking her preference rather than dictating placement, underscored Gabriel's point about respect. How long had it been since anyone had asked what she wanted rather than telling her what to do? Once her belongings were arranged to her satisfaction, Gabriel left her to settle in with a reminder that food awaited whenever she was ready. Alone in her new quarters, Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed, hands trembling slightly as she processed the day's developments. The cabin was warm, clean, and private, 3 qualities that represented unimaginable luxury after years in Catherine's cold, cluttered farmhouse where privacy was non-existent. The simple fact that she could close a door and know no one would enter without permission represented a freedom she had never experienced. Gradually, as the warmth of the stove penetrated her chilled body and the reality of her new circumstances sank in, Eliza felt something unfamiliar unfurling within her. Not quite trust, perhaps, but the tentative beginnings of hope. She had exchanged one form of servitude for another, true, but the terms of this arrangement preserved her dignity in ways she hadn't dared to expect. When she finally made her way to the main house for the promised meal, she found Rosa alone in the kitchen, humming softly as she worked. "Ah, there you are," the older woman said warmly. "Sit, eat. Men have gone to check livestock before the storm worsens." Eliza accepted a bowl of rich stew and thick slices of fresh bread, the simple food more satisfying than anything she could remember eating in years. Rosa busied herself with kitchen tasks, allowing Eliza to eat in peace while maintaining a gentle flow of conversation that required no response beyond appreciative nods. "I am glad you have come," Rosa said finally, settling across from Eliza with a cup of coffee. "This place needs a woman's touch beyond what these old hands can provide." She examined her work-roughened fingers with a rueful smile. "I can cook and clean, but the finer things, the curtains, the linens, the touches that make a house truly a home, these require younger eyes and more skilled fingers." "Your home is already more comfortable than any I've known," Eliza admitted. "The cabin especially. It's far more than I expected." Rosa's expression softened. Gabriel insisted on preparing it properly. He said you would need a sanctuary, a place that was truly your own. The statement raised more questions about Gabriel Reyes and his unusual approach to employing a housekeeper, but before Eliza could pursue them, the door opened to admit Gabriel and Miguel, bringing with them a blast of cold air and the scent of fresh snow. "Storm's settling in for the duration," Miguel reported, stamping snow from his boots. "Could be 3 days before it passes completely." "The animals are secured?" Gabriel asked, unwinding a woolen scarf from his neck. "Everything's battened down tight," Miguel confirmed. "We should all stay close to the buildings until this blows over. Visibility is already down to a few yards." The next 3 days established patterns that would shape Eliza's life at Nuevo Amanecer. Confined to the main house by the raging blizzard, she began learning the rhythms of the household and the people who composed it. Gabriel proved to be a quiet but thoughtful employer, clearly communicating his expectations while remaining receptive to her questions and suggestions. "The household accounts need organization," he explained on the second day, showing her ledgers that, while meticulously maintained, followed no system she recognized. "I've managed basic functions, but with the operation expanding this spring, we need more comprehensive records." Eliza examined the books with growing interest. Despite Catherine's controlling nature, she had taught her daughter practical bookkeeping skills, one of the few useful legacies from her otherwise painful upbringing. "I can establish a proper accounting system," she offered. "My father taught me double-entry bookkeeping before he died, and I maintained our farm records until Mother took over everything." Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a valuable skill, more so than household sewing. Would you prefer that as your primary responsibility?" The question startled her. Catherine had always assigned tasks based on her own convenience rather than Eliza's preferences or abilities. The idea that she might choose her work focus represented another small freedom she hadn't anticipated. "I enjoy both," she said thoughtfully. "Perhaps I could divide my time between them. The accounts require consistent attention, but not full days, while the household sewing and mending could fill the remaining hours." "A sensible approach," Gabriel agreed. "Organize your schedule as you see fit, provided the essential tasks are completed." This flexibility extended to other aspects of household management. Unlike Catherine, who micromanaged every detail while contributing minimal actual labor, Gabriel established clear expectations but left the methods to Eliza's discretion. It was a form of trust she had never experienced, the assumption that she was competent to make decisions without constant supervision. Rosa proved to be an unexpected ally in this transition, her motherly warmth balanced by practical wisdom, born of a hard but resilient life. During quiet moments, when the men were occupied elsewhere, she shared insights that helped Eliza navigate her new position. "Gabriel is a good man," Rosa said as they sat mending by the fire on the third evening of the storm. "Demanding of himself more than others, but fair always. He expects honesty above all else." "How long have you and Miguel known him?" Eliza asked, seizing the opportunity to learn more about her mysterious employer. Rosa's fingers continued their steady work as she considered the question. "Miguel met him first, 5 years ago in Colorado. Mining camp troubles. Bad men doing bad things. Gabriel stepped in when others looked away. After he offered Miguel work managing a small ranch he owned near Denver." "And you joined them there?" "Later, yes. I was working in a laundry. In Pueblo, hard work, bad conditions. Miguel found me, told me Gabriel needed a cook and housekeeper. Best decision I ever made, coming to work for him." Her dark eyes held Eliza's with sudden intensity. "He saved us both in different ways, though he would never describe it that way. Some men build their lives by taking from others. Gabriel builds by lifting others alongside him." The simple description resonated with what Eliza had observed herself, Unlike Crawford, whose wealth came from exploiting others' misfortunes, Gabriel seemed to measure success by the prosperity he created for those around him. When the storm finally abated on the fourth day, revealing a transformed landscape of pristine drifts and crystalline beauty, Eliza began exploring the full extent of her new home. The property was larger than she had initially realized, with carefully planned features that suggested long-term vision rather than temporary settlement. The barn housed not only workhorses, but also several fine breeding mares whose quality even Eliza's untrained eye could recognize. A separate stable contained what appeared to be yearling colts of exceptional conformation. Beyond the main buildings, partially sheltered by a stand of mature pines, she discovered beehives covered for winter protection, another unexpected resource that spoke of diverse planning. "You're raising horses," she observed when she encountered Gabriel checking the livestock that afternoon, not cattle like most ranches in this territory. "Among other things," he agreed. "Cattle are profitable, but vulnerable to harsh winters and market fluctuations. Horses, the right horses, maintain value through most economic conditions. The bees provide honey, wax, and improved pollination for the orchards we'll plant in spring." Orchards in Montana. The concept seemed absurd, given the harsh climate. Gabriel's expression showed a glimmer of the passion behind his careful planning. "There are hardy varieties that can thrive even here. Certain apples, plums, some berries. With proper protection and care, they'll produce within 3 years. Most settlers don't consider such options because they're focused on immediate returns rather than sustainable systems." "You're building something designed to last generations," Eliza realized, seeing the property through new eyes. "Not just extracting quick profit like most newcomers. A place worth having is worth building properly," he said simply. "Short-term thinking leads to long-term failure, in ranching as in most endeavors." That philosophy extended to his treatment of workers, Eliza discovered, as she became more familiar with the operation. Besides Miguel and Rosa, the ranch employed 3 permanent hands who lived in a comfortable bunkhouse. Each man received not only fair wages but also a small percentage of the ranch's annual profits, an arrangement almost unheard of in traditional ranching operations. "It gives them reason to care beyond the daily wage," Gabriel explained when she questioned the unusual system. "When the ranch prospers, they prosper. Simple principle that most owners overlook." 2 weeks into her employment, Eliza had established comfortable routines that balanced household management with the accounting work Gabriel increasingly entrusted to her. The ledgers revealed a financial foundation far more substantial than the modest ranch suggested. Investments diversified across multiple territories, income streams from operations as far away as California and Colorado. "These holdings are extensive," she noted one evening as they reviewed quarterly projections, "far beyond what most ranchers maintain." Gabriel studied her thoughtfully, as if making a decision about how much to reveal. "Nuevo Amanecer is just one of several properties I maintain. The others are managed by people like Miguel, trusted associates who share in the success they help create." "You're more businessman than rancher," Eliza suggested. "I'm whatever circumstances require," he replied, a hint of something darker flickering behind his usual composure. "Rancher, businessman, occasionally other things less easily categorized." The cryptic response might have troubled her if not for the consistent evidence of his character she observed daily. Whatever Gabriel Reyes might be beyond the boundaries of Nuevo Amanecer, within its borders, he governed with fairness, generosity, and quiet strength that inspired loyalty rather than fear. As January gave way to February, the most severe winter weather eased enough to allow more regular trips to town. Gabriel insisted that Eliza accompany him on these excursions, introducing her to merchants and townspeople as Miss Morgan, who manages my household affairs. The careful phrasing established her position as professional rather than personal, a distinction that protected her reputation while acknowledging her authority. During one such visit, they encountered Douglas Crawford outside the general store, his cold gaze hardening at the sight of them together. Gabriel placed himself slightly ahead of Eliza, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of protection. "Crawford," he acknowledged neutrally. "Reyes," Crawford returned, his attention shifting to Eliza with calculated assessment. "Miss Morgan, I trust your employment is meeting expectations." The insinuation in his tone made her skin crawl, but Gabriel's steady presence beside her bolstered her courage. "Mr. Reyes has been a model employer," she replied evenly. "The arrangements have proven most satisfactory." Crawford's mouth twisted in disbelief. "Indeed, how fortunate for you both. One wonders what specific services command such generous compensation." Before Gabriel could respond to the deliberate insult, Sheriff Henderson emerged from his office across the street. "Problem here, folks?" he called, moving toward them with purposeful strides. "No problem," Gabriel replied calmly. "Mr. Crawford was just expressing interest in Miss Morgan's welfare, which is commendable if unnecessary." The sheriff's gaze moved between the three of them, reading the undercurrents with practiced ease. "Miss Morgan seems to be thriving under your employment, Reyes. I noticed the new coat and boots. Proper winter gear makes all the difference in Montana." The deliberate mention of Eliza's improved circumstances, the warm coat and sturdy boots Gabriel had insisted on purchasing for her from the general store, served as public confirmation that her position was legitimate and her welfare adequately maintained. Crawford recognized the subtle rebuke in Henderson's observation. "Well, I've business to attend to," he said stiffly. "Good day to you all." As he stalked away, Eliza released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He still believes the worst," she murmured. "Men like Crawford judge others by their own standards," Henderson replied, keeping his voice low. "Can't imagine anyone acting from motives beyond self-interest and control." "His opinion matters little," Gabriel assured her. "What matters is that your contract is legally sound and publicly witnessed. He can spread whatever rumors he chooses, but he can't alter the documented facts." The encounter, brief as it was, reinforced Eliza's growing awareness of how fortunate her circumstances had become. Despite Crawford's insinuations, her position at Nuevo Amanecer offered dignity alongside security, a combination she had never experienced under Catherine's dominion. The knowledge that her arrangement with Gabriel had clear boundaries and a defined endpoint gave her confidence to establish herself within the household. She reorganized storage areas for greater efficiency, worked with Rosa to plan spring gardens that would supplement their food supplies, and gradually transformed the main house into a space that balanced practicality with beauty. "You have good instincts for design," Gabriel observed one evening as she hung curtains she had sewn from fabric purchased in town. "The house feels different, more balanced somehow." "A home should nurture the spirit as well as shelter the body," Eliza replied, smoothing the fabric into graceful folds. "My father believed that beauty wasn't a luxury, but a necessity for proper living." "A wise perspective," Gabriel agreed. "Most settlers focus solely on survival, forgetting that the soul requires nourishment too." It was perhaps the most personal statement he had made since her arrival, offering a glimpse of values that went beyond practical considerations. Eliza found herself increasingly curious about the experiences that had shaped this unusual man, the forces that had created someone who moved through the world with such purposeful compassion. Yet, for all his fairness as an employer, Gabriel maintained careful personal distance. He shared meals and evening conversations, discussed books from his substantial library, and consulted her on household decisions, but revealed almost nothing about his life before Montana. The boundaries were clear, though unspoken. Their relationship was professional, defined by mutual respect rather than personal connection. This recognition brought Eliza both relief and an unexpected twinge of disappointment. Relief because it confirmed her safety within the household. Disappointment because as February melted into March, she found herself increasingly drawn to Gabriel's quiet strength and principled approach to life. Spring arrived at Nuevo Amanecer in a gradual symphony of renewal. The iron grip of winter, loosened first in small ways, icicles weeping from the eaves, patches of earth emerging from beneath snow like islands in a white sea, the return of birdsong at dawn. By early April, the transformation was unmistakable. Meadows that had slumbered beneath drifts now revealed tender green shoots, and the creek that bordered the eastern edge of the property ran swift with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Eliza felt herself transforming alongside the landscape. 3 months of proper nutrition, adequate rest, and freedom from Catherine's constant criticism had worked profound changes. Her face had lost its pinched, anxious expression, replaced by healthier contours and natural color. Her hands, while still bearing the calluses of regular work, no longer cracked and bled from exposure to harsh lye soap and inadequate protection. Most significant was the change in her posture. Shoulders that had hunched defensively now straightened with growing confidence. "You carry yourself differently?" Rosa observed one morning as they worked side by side in the newly established garden. "Like a woman who knows her worth, not one who fears judgment with every step." Eliza paused, trowel in hand, considering the assessment. "I feel different," she admitted, "as if I'm becoming someone new while also discovering who I was meant to be all along." Rosa nodded with evident satisfaction. This is how healing begins, not by forgetting the wounds, but by growing beyond them, like this garden. She gestured to the neat rows they were preparing. The ground remembers winter's harshness, but still it opens to receive new seeds. The garden project had become Eliza's special pride. Working with Miguel's agricultural knowledge and Rosa's practical experience, she had designed an ambitious plot that would provide vegetables throughout the growing season, with enough surplus for preserving. Gabriel had approved her plan without hesitation, allocating resources for proper fencing, irrigation channels from the creek, and even a small greenhouse structure where tender seedlings could get an early start protected from Montana's unpredictable spring weather. "You think like someone who plans to stay," he had observed when she presented detailed sketches showing crop rotation for 3 successive seasons. The comment highlighted the temporary nature of her position, a reality she found herself increasingly reluctant to consider as her attachment to Nuevo Amanecer deepened. The 1-year contract that had once represented blessed liberation now seemed an approaching severance from a place that had become more home than any she had known. April brought increased activity to the ranch as the breeding season for the horses commenced. Gabriel's expertise in this area revealed yet another dimension of his capabilities. He worked with the animals directly, displaying a gentle authority that even the most spirited mares responded to with trust. Watching him calm a nervous young mare with nothing more than his voice and patient hands, Eliza realized she had never seen him raise his voice in anger or frustration toward any living creature. "The bloodlines must be carefully managed," he explained one evening as they reviewed the breeding records she had organized. "Each pairing is selected not just for physical traits, but temperament as well. A horse with perfect conformation, but a fractious nature, creates problems that outlast any physical beauty. Like people," Eliza observed, "outward appearance matters less than character in determining true worth." Gabriel's eyes met hers with sudden intensity. Exactly so. Though society often values the opposite, rewarding appearance and wealth, while overlooking fundamental character flaws. The statement carried personal weight that Eliza couldn't quite decipher, but before she could pursue it, they were interrupted by Miguel arriving with news of a foal's imminent birth. The moment of unexpected connection passed, yet lingered in her thoughts as she returned to her cabin later that night. The arrival of spring also brought the promised orchard project to life. Trees arrived by freight wagon from a specialized nursery in Oregon, apple, plum, and cherry varieties selected for cold hardiness and disease resistance. Gabriel had chosen a south-facing slope protected from the worst winds, and the entire ranch crew participated in the planting. These won't bear substantial fruit for at least 3 years, Miguel explained, as they carefully positioned each sapling. Many ranchers wouldn't make such an investment knowing the delayed return. But when they do produce, they'll continue for decades with proper care, Gabriel added. The best investments often require patience before revealing their full value. Eliza found herself drawn to this philosophy of deliberate, long-term thinking. It contrasted sharply with Catherine's reactive scrambling and Crawford's predatory opportunism. Gabriel built systems designed to flourish through time, rather than extracting quick profit at the expense of future stability. As her confidence grew, Eliza began expanding her contributions beyond the originally agreed duties. Her reorganization of the ranch's accounting system had proven so effective that Gabriel increasingly consulted her on business matters. She discovered an aptitude for analyzing market reports and identifying potential opportunities that seemed to impress even her normally reserved employer. "You have a natural head for business," he remarked, after she identified a pattern in lumber prices that suggested an advantageous time to commission the planned bathhouse construction. Most people see numbers as abstract figures rather than practical tools for decision-making. "My father taught me to look for patterns," Eliza explained. "He said understanding how things connect reveals opportunities others miss." "A wise man," Gabriel observed. "You speak of him often, always with respect. Your mother rarely and with reservation. Their influences on you seem to have been quite different." It was the most direct personal question he had ever asked her, opening a door to conversation beyond their working relationship. Sitting in the comfortable study that had become their usual evening workplace, Eliza found herself responding with unexpected candor. "They were opposites in almost every way," she said, setting aside the ledger she had been reviewing. "Father saw potential everywhere, in people, in the land, in ideas others dismissed. Mother saw only limitations and threats. After he died, her perspective became our reality. Yet his influence persisted in you, despite her efforts to suppress it." Eliza nodded, touched by his perception. "Some lessons sink too deep to be erased, I suppose. Father believed in building rather than taking, in seeing value where others saw only obstacles. Mother taught me caution and practicality, useful in their way, but without Father's balance, those qualities hardened into something darker in her. And in you they found equilibrium," Gabriel observed. "Practical assessment balanced with recognition of potential, a rare combination." The compliment warmed her more than it should have, perhaps because Gabriel offered praise so sparingly, and with such evident sincerity. Their conversation drifted to other topics, books they had both read, plans for summer improvements to the ranch, the progress of the newly planted orchard. But something had shifted subtly between them. A door, once closed, had opened just enough to allow glimpses of the people behind their professional roles. May brought the first visitors to Nuevo Amanecer, a pair of businessmen from Helena interested in purchasing yearling horses for a new stage line. Their arrival tested Eliza's developing confidence in her position. These were men of some importance. In territorial affairs, the kind who might question a young woman's presence in a bachelor's household despite the legally documented employment arrangement. To her surprise, Gabriel introduced her immediately as Miss Morgan, who manages our household and business accounts, then included her in all discussions regarding the potential sale. The visitor's initial skepticism faded as her knowledge of the ranch operations and financial matters became apparent during negotiations. "You run an unusual operation here, Reyes," commented the older businessman, Henry Wilson, as they toured the stables. "Not many ranchers would entrust books and household management to a young woman, let alone involve her in negotiations." "Miss Morgan has earned her position through demonstrated competence," Gabriel replied evenly. "I've found that ability rather than conventional expectations determines a person's value to an enterprise." Wilson's appraising glance at Eliza carried new respect. "Progressive thinking, especially out here in the territories, reminds me of approaches I've seen in San Francisco and other forward-looking communities." The comparison to sophisticated coastal cities rather than frontier settlements subtly elevated Nuevo Amanecer's status and, by extension, Eliza's position within it. The visitors departed 2 days later, having purchased 6 yearlings at premium prices, their initial curiosity about unusual arrangements replaced by appreciation for the ranch's evident professionalism. "You handled that beautifully," Gabriel told Eliza after the men had gone. "Your knowledge of the bloodlines impressed Wilson considerably. He mentioned it specifically before leaving." "I've been studying the breeding records," she admitted. "The histories fascinate me. How certain traits persist through generations, how careful selection can strengthen desirable qualities while minimizing weaknesses." Gabriel's expression softened with something like pride. "Most people see only the horses before them, not the careful planning across time that created them. You see both the present reality and the intentional design behind it." The genuine appreciation in his voice affected her more powerfully than any praise Catherine had ever begrudgingly offered. Unlike her mother's rare approval, which always carried the threat of withdrawal, Gabriel's recognition felt secure, based on observed performance rather than conditional acceptance. June arrived with lengthening days and intensifying activity. The garden flourished under Eliza's care, promising abundant vegetables. The orchard required regular attention as the young trees established themselves. The horse breeding program had produced 11 healthy foals, each representing significant future value. The ranch hummed with purposeful energy that Eliza found deeply satisfying after years of struggling merely to maintain her mother's failing farm. Her contentment was disrupted mid-month when a letter arrived from Catherine, the first communication since Eliza had left the farm in January. The spidery handwriting on the envelope sent a chill through her, despite the summer warmth. Gabriel, who had collected the mail during a trip to town, handed it to her without comment, but with a questioning glance that acknowledged its potential significance. Eliza waited until evening, sitting alone in her cabin, before opening the letter. Catherine's words flowed across the page with familiar bitterness, thinly disguised as maternal concern. "Your continued absence has been noted by neighbors who question what service you provide that commands such generous compensation. Crawford suggests arrangements beyond proper employment, though I defended your character despite your ungrateful departure. The farm struggles without your contribution. Perhaps you might send a portion of your wages to support the home that raised you as any dutiful daughter would naturally wish to do." The transparent attempt at manipulation, invoking community judgment, Crawford's insinuations, and familial obligation in one calculated paragraph would once have provoked anxiety and guilt. Now, Eliza recognized the pattern with clear-eyed assessment. Catherine had not once inquired about her welfare, expressed genuine concern for her circumstances, or acknowledged her as anything but a financial resource to be exploited. Rather than responding immediately from emotion, Eliza carried the letter with her to the next day's accounting session with Gabriel. Their evening reviews of ranch operations had become a comfortable routine, conducted in the study where bookshelves lined the walls, and the large desk provided ample space for their work. "My mother has written," she said simply, placing the letter between them. "I would appreciate your perspective before I respond." Gabriel read the single page carefully, his expression revealing nothing until he reached the end. Then he looked up, eyes filled with a controlled anger she had rarely seen. "This is not the letter of a mother concerned for her daughter's welfare," he said, his voice deliberately measured. "This is an attempt to re-establish control through shame and obligation." "Yes," Eliza agreed, relieved by his immediate understanding. "The question is how, or whether, to respond." Gabriel considered the question with the same careful attention. He gave to all significant decisions. "That depends on what you wish to achieve. A response that engages with her accusations, even to refute them, validates her right to make them. Silence might be interpreted as confirmation of her worst suggestions. A third path might be more effective. What would that be? Respond not to the implied accusations, but to the factual circumstances. A brief, business-like letter acknowledging receipt of her communication, confirming your continued satisfactory employment, perhaps enclosing a modest financial contribution, not because of obligation but as a gesture of your choosing. The tone and content would establish boundaries while demonstrating that her manipulative tactics have no power over your decisions." The suggestion struck Eliza as perfectly calibrated, neither defensive nor harsh, but clearly establishing her autonomy. "That approach appeals to me," she acknowledged, "though I admit part of me wishes to simply ignore her entirely." "Which would be your right," Gabriel affirmed. "The choice is yours, as is any financial support you might choose to provide. Your contract specifies that your wages are yours alone to dispose of as you see fit." The reminder of her contractual independence, a concept that would have seemed impossible under Catherine's roof, strengthened Eliza's resolve. The following day, she composed a brief, factual response, enclosed $10 from her savings, an amount significant enough to be helpful, but not so large as to suggest ongoing obligation, and sent the letter with the weekly supply wagon. To town, the interaction marked another milestone in her developing self-determination. 6 months earlier, a letter from Catherine would have thrown her into anxious compliance. Now she could respond from choice rather than fear, maintaining connection on her terms rather than submitting to manipulation. July brought the first real test of the ranch's emergency preparedness when a summer lightning storm ignited a brush fire that threatened the western pastures. Gabriel's foresight in establishing fire breaks and maintaining emergency water reserves proved crucial as the entire ranch crew worked through the night to contain the blaze. Eliza found herself coordinating supplies, preparing food for exhausted firefighters, and even joining the bucket line when the flames approached dangerously close to the barn. Throughout the crisis, she observed Gabriel's leadership with growing admiration. He worked alongside his men in the most dangerous areas, his calm authority never wavering even as the situation grew critical. By dawn, the fire had been contained, with minimal damage to ranch property, though one of the outlying pastures had been scorched. As the crew gathered for a late breakfast after the ordeal, Gabriel acknowledged everyone's contribution, including Eliza's. "Your organization of supplies and support made it possible for us to focus entirely on the fire line," he told her as Rosa served much-needed coffee. "That contribution was as essential as the water we poured on the flames." The simple acknowledgement, offered publicly and with evident sincerity, confirmed her integration into the ranch's operations beyond her specified duties. She was no longer merely an employee, but a valued member of a community that functioned through mutual support and recognition of each person's contributions. That sense of belonging deepened through the summer months as Eliza's responsibilities expanded naturally in response to her demonstrated capabilities. When Gabriel needed to travel to Helena for a week on business matters, he left her in charge of daily operations alongside Miguel, a position of trust that would have been unthinkable in her early days at the ranch. "You've earned the crew's respect," he told her before departing. "They'll follow your direction because they've seen your judgment proven sound, not because I've instructed them to do so." His absence created an unexpected void in Eliza's daily routine. She had grown accustomed to their evening discussions, the quiet exchanges over ledgers and reports that had gradually evolved to include wider topics: books, ideas, observations about human nature, and the developing territory around them. Without these interactions, the evening seemed strangely empty, despite her full days managing ranch operations. "You miss him," Rosa observed astutely as they preserved garden vegetables during the 7th day of Gabriel's absence. Eliza's hands stilled momentarily over the canning jars. "I miss our discussions," she clarified, though the distinction felt somehow inadequate. "He has an unusual perspective on many subjects." Rosa's knowing smile suggested she heard the unspoken currents beneath this simple explanation. "Gabriel sees the world differently than most men," she agreed. "He builds rather than conquers, nurtures rather than exploits. These qualities are rare, especially in places still considered frontier. His background must be unusual to have developed such perspectives," Eliza ventured, hoping Rosa might offer insights into Gabriel's closely guarded past. The older woman's expression turned thoughtful. "His path has not been easy, but it has forged something exceptional. The darkness he has witnessed makes him value light more deeply than those who have never known true shadow." She paused, then added, "But his story is his own to share when he decides the time is right." The gentle rebuff reminded Eliza that despite her growing closeness to the household, certain boundaries remained. Gabriel's past was one territory she had not been invited to explore, and Rosa's loyalty would not breach his privacy regardless of her affection for Eliza. Gabriel returned from Helena bearing not only completed business agreements, but also unexpected gifts: new books for the growing library, fabric for Rosa, specialized tools for Miguel and for Eliza, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials discreetly embossed on the cover. "I noticed you making notes on scraps of paper," he explained when she thanked him. "Thought you might appreciate something more permanent for your observations and ideas." The thoughtfulness of the gift, recognizing a habit she hadn't realized he'd noticed, touched her deeply. It acknowledged not just her practical contributions to the ranch, but her intellectual life as well, the inner world of thoughts and observations she had rarely shared before coming to Nuevo Amanecer. August brought the harvest season into full swing. The garden yielded abundant vegetables that kept Eliza and Rosa busy preserving for winter. The hay meadows required cutting and storing. The yearling horses needed consistent training for upcoming sales. Through it all, Eliza found herself increasingly responsible for coordinating these various operations, using her organizational skills to ensure that resources and labor were allocated efficiently. "You have a talent for seeing the whole picture, while maintaining attention to critical details," Gabriel observed as they reviewed the month's progress. "Most people excel at one or the other, rarely both." "It comes from having to manage scarce resources," Eliza explained. "On Mother's farm, every decision had consequences that could mean comfort or hardship months later." I learned to plan carefully while remaining flexible enough to adapt when circumstances changed. You've transformed that necessity-born skill into a broader capability, Gabriel noted. What began as survival strategy has become a strength that creates prosperity. The observation captured something essential about her evolution at Nuevo Amanecer. Skills developed under duress had flourished in supportive conditions, expanding beyond mere coping mechanisms to become genuine talents that contributed to collective success. As summer began its gradual transition toward autumn, Eliza became increasingly aware of the approaching end of her contract. October would mark a full year since the agreement that had rescued her from Crawford's clutches. While the prospect of complete independence had once represented her ultimate goal, she now found herself reluctant to contemplate leaving Nuevo Amanecer. The ranch had become more than employment. It was community, purpose, and home in ways her mother's farm had never been. Her relationship with Gabriel had evolved from employer-employee to something more complex and valuable, a partnership based on mutual respect and complementary abilities. The thought of severing these connections created an ache she hadn't anticipated when signing the year-long agreement. Late September brought the first hint of autumn chill and an unexpected visitor to the ranch. Eliza was reviewing supply inventories on the front porch when a familiar wagon appeared on the road from town, Sheriff Henderson's distinctive vehicle approaching at a deliberate pace. Gabriel emerged from the barn as the sheriff pulled up to the hitching post. The men exchanged greetings that suggested friendly acquaintance rather than official business, but Henderson's expression carried unusual gravity. "Need to speak with you privately, Reyes," the sheriff said, after declining offers of refreshment. "Matter of some importance." They retreated to Gabriel's study while Eliza continued her work, trying not to speculate about the nature of this unusual visit. Nearly an hour passed before the men emerged, their serious expressions suggesting the discussion had indeed involved significant matters. "Miss Morgan," Henderson greeted her with formal courtesy. "Good to see you thriving. Ranch. Life clearly agrees with you." "Thank you, Sheriff. I found the work rewarding and the environment conducive to personal growth." Henderson nodded approvingly. "Glad to hear it. Your successful arrangement here has become something of a model I've referenced when other difficult situations arose. Shows there are alternatives to traditional solutions when people think creatively and act with integrity." After the sheriff's departure, Gabriel remained unusually preoccupied during their evening meal. The comfortable conversation that typically flowed among the household members faltered under his evident distraction. When the dishes had been cleared, he asked Eliza to join him for a walk around the property, an unusual request that suggested matters of importance needed discussion. The evening air carried the first crisp hints of the changing season as they followed a path that wound through the orchard. The young trees had established themselves well during their first growing season, their branches already showing the structured pruning that would eventually produce abundant fruit. "Henderson brought news that concerns both the ranch and your personal situation," Gabriel said finally, as they paused beside the creek that marked the property's eastern boundary. "Douglas Crawford has been attempting to acquire neighboring properties through various means, some of questionable legality. His apparent goal is to establish a land holding that surrounds Nuevo Amanecer completely." Eliza frowned, immediately grasping the strategic implications. "He's trying to isolate the ranch, control access routes, water rights, potentially even passage to town." "Exactly." Gabriel's expression showed appreciation for her quick understanding. "It's a common tactic among land barons in developing territories, surround smaller holdings, then apply pressure until the owner has no choice but to sell." "But why target this property specifically?" There are larger, more established ranches that would seem more valuable acquisitions. Gabriel was silent for a long moment, studying the flowing water rather than meeting her gaze. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of decision, as if he had come to some internal resolution. Crawford's actions aren't motivated primarily by business interests, he said quietly. They're personal, directed at me specifically, and by extension, at you. At me? But why would he? Because you represent something he couldn't control, Gabriel interrupted gently. Your escape from his arrangement damaged more than his pride. It challenged his carefully constructed image as the territory's most powerful man, someone whose will cannot be successfully opposed. The realization settled over Eliza with chilling clarity. Crawford's attempt to acquire her through Catherine had never been primarily about marriage or even physical possession. It had been about power, demonstrating his ability to take whatever he wanted, regardless of the subject's wishes. And you prevented that demonstration of power, she concluded, made him appear vulnerable by offering an alternative that exposed the coercive nature of his arrangement. Gabriel nodded. Men like Crawford don't forgive such challenges. Their position depends on the perception of absolute authority. Any successful opposition must be crushed to prevent others from recognizing that resistance is possible. The creek murmured beside them, its constant flow contrasting with the shifting human circumstances they discussed. Eliza considered the implications of Crawford's vendetta, seeing beyond the immediate threat to broader patterns. This isn't just about land acquisition, she said slowly. He's trying to force you into a public defeat to restore his image of invincibility. Precisely. Gabriel's gaze held new respect for her analysis. The land strategy is merely the visible manifestation of a deeper agenda. What does this mean for the ranch, for those who live and work here? Gabriel turned to face her directly, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. That depends partly on decisions you'll need to make soon. Your contract expires in 3 weeks. Originally, that would have meant you were free to leave with your savings and build an independent life elsewhere. Now Crawford's actions complicate that straightforward path. How so? If you remain in the territory after our arrangement ends, you become vulnerable again. Without the legal protection of our witnessed contract, Crawford could resume his efforts to control you through your mother's cooperation or other means. Henderson believes he's already making inquiries about your plans after October. The knowledge that Crawford's obsession with control had not diminished over the passing months sent a chill through Eliza, despite the mild evening. The freedom she had anticipated now appeared fraught with unseen dangers. What options do I have? She asked, her practical nature asserting itself even as anxiety threatened. Several, Gabriel replied. You could leave the territory entirely, use your savings to establish yourself in Colorado or perhaps California beyond Crawford's influence. You could seek formal employment elsewhere in Montana with another documented contract, though finding a position that offers both security and independence might prove challenging. He paused, seeming to gather resolve before continuing. Or you could remain at Nuevo Amanecer under a new arrangement, not as an employee but as a partner with legal standing in the ranch operations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.